Okay, managing a build environment with 50 plus custom plugins. Purpose here is really to talk about how we have more plugins than might be wise, and things we've run into with that, maybe tips on doing that if you really want to go there. And also, of course, some of my vacation photos, because that's what you should expect in my presentations. So in the beginning, we used an SGML-based toolset. Jarno sort of hinted at this earlier. When we started out with DITA, we had a big legacy giant SGML-based toolset, and we shoved DITA processing into there. That DIT-to-HTML command from that previous diagram was part of that. So the toolkit was pushed in, but it wasn't actually used directly. This was painful. It got me frustrated a lot. It made it really hard to upgrade. And it meant that set of tools got stuck on toolkit 1.7 and never moved on. More recently, we have shifted over internally to a set of tools that actually uses the toolkit directly. We are on 2.5.4, the latest fix pack to the latest release, and it's easy to upgrade. And we have everything as plugins rather than hacking pieces apart and reassembling. So that's just sort of the context of what we're doing. So working with that many plugins was problematic early on. The plugins that we had in our old system were not necessarily plugins, which is why they're in quotes here, because we weren't actually using the toolkit directly. They were clearly plugins because they were in a directory called plugins. That's step one. Beyond that, it was a tangled web of ugly code. We had a lot of those from before there were plugins. I think actually Deborah Pickett, I believe, is responsible for the original plugin design. She's the one that got that in there around 1.4. Before that, extensions were just hacked in extensions. So we were not in a good spot initially, and we had years of bad design patterns that finally caught up to us. A few of you should encounter this because I don't think anyone else in here has been using plugins from 2004, probably, before there were plugins. Yeah, a few of you should encounter that. But you could end up with a lot of plugins either now or in a few years. So we decided it was time to rebuild everything. Basically just scrap all of that history and start over. It's a lot easier to do that than to try to adapt again. So we made everything a plugin. That's been great. Refactor to use the latest code as time permits. Again, that's sort of do what you can in the time allowed, and some ugly code is left over from the transfer, but we'll get to that later. We did manage to drop a lot of obsolete code, which is great, and yeah, it's never as easy as you would like, but it's great to get rid of that stuff. And we've moved to continuous delivery. Basically, everybody's using the same system, which has pluses and minuses. It means that we have to have basically one toolkit that supports everybody in the company, and everybody's using the same transform types. And that's not necessarily where everybody should be or wants to be. How far have we come? Well, at this point, now we're on 2.5.4. A couple weeks ago, we were on 2.5.3 when I made this slide. We have 66 plugins that are there today. Does that sound like a lot? Yes? Anybody think they have more than that? One poor person is raising their arm. So there are 13 of those are from the toolkit itself. Those are what are shipped in 2.5. 2 of those are the Oasis document types. But then the others, we have Jarno's Markdown plugin in place. We have one that came from Synchrosoft. A bunch related to EPUB. That's sort of a trimmed down version of Elliot's EPUB code from a while back. I doubt that it is 7 plugin directories right now. I don't know if it's more or less. 9 plugins that are related to syntax diagrams, and then 33 others. So quite a few. As I said, everybody has access to everything. In our environment, we have to have one toolkit that everybody can get to because they're all going to the same place to build. So you can't have this set of customers using this type of product have the 3 plugins they need to support that, and this person has 10 plugins. We have to have a common environment. That's sort of just where we are. So those plugins are made up of our document types, the customized ones, the IBM topic, IBM task, IBM reference, all of those, as well as specializations. I think we've got 7 or 8 specialized topics. A couple listed here. We have a message topic, quick start guide. And then we have a bunch of transform types. We have our basic IBM PDF. We have the media insert. We actually still have a customized transform type with PDF2 that will produce the label that goes inside the DVD. We have quick start guides. We have license information for PDF. HTML5, our primary target, is our Knowledge Center platform, plain text, and a few others. So how do we manage that? We manage it with difficulty, but it is so much easier than before. Using the toolkit as it's supposed to be used is more usable. We do keep a fully integrated copy of the toolkit in our source code repository, which may not be ideal, but it's working for us at the moment. It's all fully integrated. Problem there, if you check in code to your plugin and then you forget to reintegrate, somebody might grab it straight from the source code repository and your plugins don't show up because it wasn't integrated. So that's not ideal, but we do have some automated testing of our updates, but it's nowhere near as robust as the toolkit testing process, the automated testing. I would like to be able to hook into that better or make use of it better, and I'm not sure if that's possible. Problem that we've run into is plugin dependencies. I'm going to point at Elliot. I should do that more often if he reacts like that. It's kind of fun. The HTML+ plugins, really the hardest part of using HTML+ to get that SVG diagram out was all of the dependencies. There were 40 or 50 plugins in there. And some of them were sort of created as a tree where plugin A would require plugin B, and plugin B didn't have anything in it except that if you were using plugin B, you also knew that these other things would be there. And it made it really hard to get rid of unnecessary code, figure out what was actually being used. The plugins referred to each other all over the place. So untangling that took a long time. EPUB, the EPUB code within the original Data for Publishers set of plugins wasn't quite that bad. I had similar problems, and I've complained about them to Elliot in the past, and I know that he's got separate deliveries now, which is great.
I did that just for you.
Yeah. So whenever you point at Elliot, things happen. Sometimes. Yeah, so EPUB's a lot better now, but that was an initial problem we had with that. I did add some of my own dependencies and came to regret it. I didn't realize I was making spaghetti, but I ended up with it. Originally we had IBM topics, our IBM map, IBM topic, IBM everything. And then we had a separate plugin for the domains that were IBM domains because, in the early days of DITA, everything was like, we're going to be able to use this independently and this independently and this independently. And then we never, ever did that. Instead, we just created dependencies so that if you moved one thing, everything broke. I've shuffled that around now so that basically where there's no realistic chance of us using things independently, they're combined into one plugin. Get rid of those dependencies. It's a lot easier to manage. Another debugging issue, of course, is working with other people's code. Like when I had a problem with the EPUB code I was using from Elliot, or the SVG stuff was hard as well. And basically that comes down to two things. The lack of familiarity with the code, obviously, but it also is difficult to debug somebody else's code when it's mixed with all of yours. It's difficult to debug your code when it's mixed with everybody else's. Often whenever I had a problem with an image, for example, it's really hard to look for the rule that's matching image across all of your plugins when I know that it's in my PDF style somewhere. Something is firing that shouldn't in the XSLT. Some priority rule has gotten messed up. But half the results I get are from EPUB plugins or HTML+ plugins. The more and more code you have in there, the harder it is to debug. So, what to try, what to watch out for. These are my tips. Others have probably got other tips, but I try to remove dependencies whenever possible. I try to merge things together if they only make sense together. Upgrade the toolkit often. Even better, test upcoming releases. And I know that's hard to do because you're always doing as much as you can to get to the next release and you don't have time to do extra stuff. That's why Jarno had to complain to me to test preprocess 2, which I didn't get around to nearly as soon as I should have. But yeah, upgrade often, test in advance if you can. Testing in advance also means that when it is time to actually upgrade, it's going to go a lot faster. Just from the testing I did a couple weeks ago, I already pretty much know what I'm going to have to change to make use of preprocess 2 and some of our internal stuff. One thing I have found useful for the issue of debugging across other people's code is to create new plugin directories. Maybe some of you don't know this. The configuration properties file in the toolkit lets you specify alternate locations for plugins. By default, it looks in a demo directory and the plugins directory. And that demo is just because that's where all plugins were back in DITA-OT 1.0. Now they're in the plugins directory, but I've added plugins EPUB, which is where all the stuff I've gotten from Elliot's code goes in there. Plugins Plus has all of the SVG diagram related code. So that lets me search within the scope of these big major functions. I might have use in having more plugin directories, but again, it's a balance. So does anything work well having so many plugins? Well, yes, we have a lot of functions and everybody can use them. That's great. Incompatibilities and upgrading now are rare and generally well documented. The migration instructions are in there in the toolkit. Jumping from 1.7 up to 2.0 was really hard. 2.0 through 2.5 was not. Make use of the plugin syntax that, I don't know how long that's been around now, several releases, maybe back to 2.0. I don't remember for sure. But when you reference imports, XSL imports, ANT imports, you can use the plugin syntax, and that allows you to move things around a lot more easily, to move plugins into a new plugins directory when you need to separate out all of your Elliot plugins because they're in the way. Yeah, further study, I've got links to the toolkit page. The other thing here, in particular, my silly stuff link has a bunch of sample plugins for those who were wanting me to talk about how to make plugins. That wasn't what I was here to talk about. Sorry, but here's a link that might be helpful. And yeah, I'm ready for your advice on how to make this easier. Anybody else have experience with lots of plugins, positive or negative? Yes?
What do you use to handle dependencies?
To handle dependencies? In what sort of dependencies? Between plugins? When the dependencies still exist, I use the plugin, the require element within your plugin, which says, this plugin only functions with the other thing. That's a way to sort of state your dependency so that you won't accidentally add something without the stuff it depends on. Within the code, if you have to reference something in another plugin, always use the plugin syntax. That simplifies things a lot.
So you have to try and install plugins to know if you're missing the dependencies.
So if a dependency is missing, you have to install the thing that it depends on. Yes.
You can
Yes.
always just look at the plugin.xml file to see what the dependencies are.
Yes. Yeah. To actually declare a dependency in a toolkit plugin, there's the plugin.xml file that says everything you need to know about your plugin. And one of the things that's there is a statement that I will not work without these specific plugins. That's the dependency, and so you can see what's needed. Yes.
Have you tried to use dependency management solutions?
I have not tried to use any dependency management solutions, and part of that is because I'm the only one that touches this code. So I'm in that sort of position. If I were having to rely on plugins from others where I want their automated updates, I would probably need to move to something like that. Yes, Elliot?
Yeah, I would just echo your caution to try to keep your dependency tree as clean as possible.
Yeah.
Because when Robert asked me for a set of plugins that would do just EPUB out of the DITA for Publishers project, which has not 50 plugins, but a lot.
A lot, yeah.
And I realized, oh, my dependency is just this nest that's bad. So he forced me to fix that, which is good. But I shouldn't have let that happen in the first place.
Yeah. Well, and it's telling that even after going through that, I entered that own mess on my own. Like as we moved from our old HTML system to a pure DITA-OT plugin approach, I started turning into things. Okay, I need to make this an official plugin. This directory won't work without that one. And yeah, cleaning that up was a very good thing when I realized what I was doing. But it usually takes getting a little bit burned before you pull back from the flame. So I'm trying to warn you of the flame now. Yes, I think I'm right at the end of my time. Are there any other questions? All right, perfect. Roger, I think it's your turn.